Because of social media constraints around particular topics, I'm not permitted to bring you news in an open and honest way here on the Mr. Reagan YouTube channel. YouTube, it seems, demands that those of us who discuss political topics lie to you. Well, I'm not going to do that. Instead, today, I shall be reading from a series of science fiction stories entitled The Epic of Tirth. This particular story is entitled The Lady Doth Protest Too Much. And so, without further ado, let's get into it. A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, there was Tirth.
Mr. Reagan.
Did you know collagen comes from the ancient Greek word for glue? This is because collagen acts like a glue between our cells and our body's organs. It's the main structural protein that forms the protective tissue throughout the whole body, from skin to bones, muscle, tendons, and ligaments. The problem is that the body doesn't produce an unlimited amount of collagen. In fact, our bodies produce about 10% less collagen every decade. Those who supplement collagen often note it's like a fountain of youth. Benefits include loss of wrinkles and pain-free joints. This is why I highly recommend Ageless Multi-Collagen from BioTrust. This multi-collagen is a scientifically backed collection of the highest quality types of collagen that our body needs for thicker hair, more youthful skin, healthier nails, pain-free joints. It's flavorless, odorless, and it dissolves quickly. I take this because of the joint issue. I actually have a problem with my joints. I've had it since I was about 14. This is a problem for me. If I want to stay healthy, I take collagen. I highly recommend it for you as well, especially if you're getting up there in age. Like, I'm 41. Some people may think that I look young. Maybe it's partly, at least, because of this collagen stuff. I don't know. But I take it, I like it, genuinely believe in it, and if you don't believe me, you can look it up, the benefits of collagen. It's been highly researched, and it's universally appreciated throughout the medical community. Look it up, collagen, very helpful. And according to the script that they sent me, many users who did not have success with other collagen supplements report that Ageless Multi-Collagen from BioTrust works great for them. This is it right here. I do take it. This is a closed package, but I do have opened ones, obviously, because I do take this stuff every single morning. I'll get my favorite multi-collagen for 51% off, or by going to healthwithreagan.com. That's healthwithreagan.com, or click the link in the description below. Right? Okay. In the days of Tirth, there was a tally of votes from across the land in a nation called the Unified States of America. The tally was called the Great Selection of the Executive, and after that tally was collected and counted, it was determined, curiously, that the winner of the Great Selection was a weak and feeble man by the name of Beau Jiden. It was a surprise because Trumpius was, without doubt, one of the greatest executives that had ever ruled over America. What was even more surprising was that in the days and weeks leading up to the Great Selection, there was not a single American across the land who could be found that was excited to vote for the challenger, Beau Jiden. Flying in the face of reason, this unpopular challenger, the man no one was excited to cast a tally for, this man somehow received the highest tally number in the history of the land of America. It didn't make sense. It seemed, after the tally was counted, that something crooked had occurred, and many believed that the tally had been doctored. The supporters of the great leader, Donald J. Trumpius, were primarily members of a good and noble fraternity known as the Freepublicans. The supporters of Beau Jiden were members of an evil cult known as the Deceptocrat Party. What made the good Freepublicans even more suspicious was that anytime an investigation of corruption possibly altering the result of the Great Selection was suggested, the Deceptocrats became erratic. They did not merely oppose such investigations, they ridiculed the suspicions of the Freepublicans, calling these suspicions discredited conspiratorial conjectures. But the conjectures of the Freepublicans weren't discredited at all. The evil Deceptocrats were merely lying about this, as they were wont to do. They were saying that these conjectures were discredited because they didn't want anyone to take them seriously. In fact, even among voters of Beau Jiden, Deceptocrat voters, even within that group, 20 to 30% believed that it was likely that the tally was doctored, that the Great Selection had been cheated. If the Deceptocrat news media couldn't even convince their own people that the Great Selection was fair, one would think that everyone in the entire country, except the most unreasonable and corrupt, would want investigations into tally doctoring. They'd want suspicious statistical anomalies investigated. Even if they genuinely believed the Great Selection was fair, you'd think that kind of doubt in the mind of the public would inspire them to want to prove their innocence, to remove all doubt in the mind of the public that the tally was doctored, to exonerate themselves. And yet, they did not. They fought viciously against any investigation. And in fact, every time Republicans tried to present evidence in a court of law, the courts rejected their attempts, and their cases were never adjudicated. This was a great blow to the Republican effort to prove that the Great Selection had been manipulated and that their leader, the great Donaldus J. Trumpius, was the true executive of the Unified States of America. All right, next page. And then, in April of the year following the Great Selection, the first year of the reign of Beau Jiden, a man that would eventually be known as Jiden the Feeble, in April, the first year of his reign, there was an event known as the Audit of Zarazona. Zarazona was a region of America that had, according to the official result of the Great Selection, had cast their tallies in favor of Beau Jiden. But this was a greatly contested result. The Republicans suspected foul play in Zarazona, and so they eventually organized a great audit there. The great audit was authorized by the Zarazona State Senate. Senate President Farhan Khan chose 4 businesses to participate. One of these companies was a cybersecurity company known as Cyber Ninjas. The owner of this business was a gentleman by the name of Lug Dogan. Lug Dogan was immediately investigated by Deceptocrat activists over at National Propaganda Radio, or NPR. The Deceptocrat activists at NPR discovered that Lug Dogan had previously tweeted that he believed the tally numbers of the Great Selection were indeed doctored, and the entire process was corrupt and fraudulent. The Deceptocrat activists at NPR then indicated that this somehow invalidated the Great Audit of Zarazona. But how could it possibly invalidate the audit? Everyone has a perspective. You either believe the Great Selection was doctored, or you don't. Would they rather have had somebody who had no opinion? There were people in the country who had not formed an opinion on this, certainly, but those people were merely uninformed. I don't have an opinion on which kind of polymers are best for the production of road cones. Some plastics are soft, some are hard. For a road cone, do you use polyethylene? Should one use polycarbonate? Should you use nylon? I have no idea because I'm not educated in the field of plastics manufacturing, nor am I educated in anything like chemical engineering. These are fields in which I have very little expertise. And so I don't think I'm the best person to test the structural integrity or perform a chemical analysis on a road cone. You will always need people who are experts in their field doing analysis, which requires expertise in those fields. In the same way, you will need experts in data analysis to analyze the tally data, and in particular, you'll need experts in data analysis who understand the tally process and who are familiar with the Great Selection of 2020. These experts will inevitably have an opinion on the validity of that election, whether it be an opinion that the selection was fair or that the selection was doctored. An analyst might not admit to having an opinion, but certainly if he is intimately familiar with the process and the events of the selection, he will inevitably have formed an opinion. So the question is not one of finding a fence sitter, it's merely one of finding an expert capable of analyzing the data and coming to a valid conclusion, whatever his initial preconceptions might be. Now, after that analysis has been conducted and a conclusion has been drawn, there will inevitably be questions as to whether or not the analyst was honest. And the conclusion of that analyst will inevitably be dissected by those who are skeptical of him or his conclusion. That's to be expected, and I would argue it's a good thing. And if you're concerned about the honesty of the analyst, then that is what you should pin your hopes on. However, in the case of the Great Audit of Zarazona, Deceptocrat pundits have apparently already determined that the analyst who's conducting the audit will find that the tally was doctored, and they are insisting already that this conclusion will be dishonest. The best example of this comes from one evil Democrat political pundit. This woman is possibly the most dishonest purveyor of fake news on the planet of tirth, a vile woman who goes by the name Machel Raddow. All right, now let's watch Machel Raddow try to insist, while clearly trying to suppress panicked hysteria, let's watch her try to insist that the Great Audit of Zarazona should be discredited before it has even been conducted.
This Arizona story, like I said, I did not expect to be seeing it, to be covering it again tonight after we covered it last night. It is obviously strange. It's laughable in lots of ways. But former President Trump, put out a statement today lauding this and talking about how this was going to reveal the truth of the 2020 election and citing a whole bunch of other states that are also going to now do this to reveal the truth of the 2020 election. And he's still maintaining this fantasy that he somehow won and that Joe Biden isn't really the president anymore. He's not the legitimate president.
Notice the level of ridicule presented here by Machel Raddow. Certainly, free publicans also ridicule Deceptocrats, but we do so when Deceptocrats do something that is clearly crazy. We don't ridicule them when we merely have a disagreement in political policy. This is the difference between an honest person and a deceptive person. The honest person will ridicule something that they honestly perceive is ridiculous. But a deceptive person will use ridicule as a weapon, a tool to manipulate those whom they are trying to deceive. And using ridicule to target something that's totally reasonable will indeed trick some people. Some people will be persuaded to believe that the target of the ridicule is ridiculous. Let's watch more of Machel Raddow's desperate rant against the audit.
What the Arizona Republicans are doing here, this process by which they are bastardizing the actual secure election from November 2020.
Bastardizing. Here's another deceptive tactic from Machel Raddow. The word bastardizing means to corrupt, to contaminate, to adulterate, to degrade, to pervert. But an audit is supposed to do precisely the opposite. An audit is conducted in order to ensure the integrity of a selection. It's an attempt to investigate the veracity of a tally. Could an audit, quote, bastardize an election? I don't see how. Machel Raddow seems to think that these auditors are going to go in and, I guess, replace the tally cards with new counterfeit ones, or perhaps change the markings on the tally cards in an attempt to invalidate them or something like that. This is all, of course, totally irresponsible, radical speculation, and I would go even so far as to call it intentionally misleading. What Machel Raddow isn't telling people is that the entire audit is being streamed live to the entire world. Instead, she seems to be diving headfirst into her own dubious conspiratorial conjectures.
What the Arizona Republicans are doing here, this process by which they are bastardizing the actual secure election from November 2020, and they're going to produce some result that says that it was some other fraudulent thing, will be used by the Trump part of the Republican Party and the Trump right to cast doubt on the 2020 election among their most fervent supporters in a way that none of their failed lawsuits in the past have been able to do. They got the actual ballots and they handed them to conspiracy theorists who say that, you know, QAnon is the mastermind or whatever it is that stopped this, that they need to use to stop the steal and all. I mean, the craziest parts of the pro-Trump conspiracy theory world have the actual ballots and are going to declare that something different happened in the election in Arizona than what really happened. And that will become a lie that they try to live on and build on for a long time to come. You watch. This is a ridiculous story that will become very dangerous in the long run.
To me, it looks as if, in this video, Machel Raddow is scared. It looks like she's convinced that some kind of tally doctoring will be exposed and that doubt will then be cast on the validity of the Great Selection in its entirety. And it looks to me as if this fear has driven her to desperately try to reconcile the discovery of a doctored tally result with the result she wants to believe, which is that the Great Selection was totally fair and pure and perfect. And so even before the audit has been concluded, she's trying to convince those who watch her show that the audit itself was corrupt. And this desperation, this attempt to discredit the investigation before the investigation has even begun, is, to me, an alarming sign that Machel Raddow, in fact, believes that the Great Selection was indeed fraudulent. Again, if a significant percentage of the population doubts the veracity of the result of the tally in the Great Selection, and if the selection was indeed fair and pure and perfect, then the winner of the selection will want, naturally, for the public to believe confidently in that truth. They would want the public to trust the veracity of that selection, and so they should want an investigation, or at least they should cooperate with one, even if they believe it's absurd that anyone doubts it. Consider this. If Donaldus J. Trumpius had won an election and the Deceptocrats believed that the election was fraudulent, then surely a thorough investigation would be conducted, probably one costing millions of dollars, conducted over several months. And Donaldus J. Trumpius himself, as great a leader as he is, would surely cooperate fully with such an investigation. But of that we can only speculate. Oh wait, no. We need not only speculate, because that happened. When Donaldus J. Trumpius won the selection 4 years ago, the Deceptocrats did indeed claim that the selection was fraudulent. And there was indeed an investigation. And throughout that investigation, Donaldus J. Trumpius did indeed cooperate, and he was indeed exonerated. And yet, when the Decepticrats are accused, there is no investigation, there is no cooperation, even with 20 to 30% of their own party members admitting that they believe the tally was doctored. And if 20 to 30% of them admit that they believe it was doctored, how many more think it was doctored but refrain from admitting this? Might the true number not be 40% or 50%? Who knows? But not only do they not want an investigation even when the veracity of the selection in even one state is being examined through an audit, well, they not only oppose it, they ridicule it. And they desperately try to discredit the result even before it's concluded. The lady doth protest too much. And so we come to the conclusion of this chapter in the saga that we call the Epic of Tirth. Anyway, that's it for me, and remember, it's not that our Decepticrat friends are ignorant, it's just that they know so much. That is not so. Good night.
If nothing in life is worth dying for, when did this begin? Should Moses have told the children of Israel to live in slavery under the Pharaohs? Should Christ have refused the cross? The martyrs of history were not fools. And our honored dead, who gave their lives to stop the advance of the Nazis, didn't die in vain.